Hey, I'm Sean. I work with Leighton. But yeah, Gator, if you don't mind, we can start going ahead with working through this PowerPoint here. So the topics for today, we're just going to do a quick intro to Leighton and Electrify if you're familiar with either of us and what we do. We're going to talk about Leighton's Capital Stack Booster, which is our CRE incentives. And then we're going to talk and switch over to Electrify's area of expertise and talk about CPACE financing.
Next slide.
As I mentioned, I'm Sean Revel. I'm Leighton's Senior 45L consultant. I've been doing building energy efficiency work for over 7 years. I'm a certified HERS rater, Energy Star certifier. My background is working on the first ever community that adopted zero energy ready homes as its building code before joining Leighton. Since joining Leighton, I've been able to get our clients over $6.5 million in 45L tax credits. And yeah, that's about me. So, Grant.
Yeah, thanks, Sean. Thanks to the Leighton team for having us as well. My name is Grant Keeney. I'm a managing director at Electrify on our transactions and originations team. Prior to my time in the CPACE world, I spent about a decade with a couple of different owner, operator, developers on the West Coast. And prior to that, I was a sell side REIT analyst at an investment bank in New York.
So quickly, Leighton's an international tax firm. We've been around for over 25 years. We're in countries all over the world. We specialize in niche tax incentives that CPAs are either not aware of or unable to handle to make sure that our clients get back all the money that they deserve.
Yeah, a little bit about Electrify. Electrify was founded in 2021, so a relatively new company. We started transacting in about mid-2023. We are a CPACE origination platform, tech-enabled, fully integrated, and our goal is to simplify the CPACE financing for lenders and for borrowers. Mission of the company is to decarbonize the built environment. And our kind of marquee CPACE platform is called FastPace. And the FastPace, goal is again to just simplify the CPACE process and to enable every lender to be a CPACE lender.
So Leighton specializes in lots of different tax incentives and niche tax incentives. Today, we're going to focus in specifically on what our commercial real estate tax incentives are. So these are the overview of the four main products that we work on at Leighton. There's the 45L residential energy efficiency tax credit, the 179D commercial energy efficiency tax deduction, and cost segregation, which, while not necessarily having anything to do with energy efficiency, is still a very useful tool for all commercial building owners. And then we're going to touch on the 48E energy credit. You might have heard it as the ITC. We're going to get more in depth into all of these, but just high level for you guys to kind of think about of what's the value of all of these products. The 45L tax credit is up to $5,000 per unit, per dwelling unit. The 179D commercial deduction is based on square footage, and you can get up to $5.65 per square foot. Cost segregation is a form of accelerating depreciation. On average, our cost segregation engineers can accelerate 15 to 30% of the building's basis. And then the 48E ITC is for renewable energy products, and it ranges anywhere from 6% to 70%, depending on what applicable bonuses you can get, prevailing wage requirements, and all of that, which we'll get into a little bit later on. So we'll start off with 179D. This is the energy efficient commercial building property deduction. It's actually been around since 2005, but with the Inflation Reduction Act, the amounts were increased and it's guaranteed through 2032 now. The main crux of this is that it looks at lighting, the building envelope, as well as the HVAC systems of a building and compares it to the ASHRAE 90.1 standard in energy modeling. So if you meet the minimum requirements, you get a tax credit based on the square foot of the building, based on a positive energy efficiency model, energy model. So it is for commercial buildings. So it applies for conditioned warehouses, offices, schools. Hotels are a big one that we do a lot of work with clients with, as well as hospitals, military facilities, and correctional facilities. So commercial building owners traditionally are the ones that mostly take advantage of this tax deduction. You have to own the building to be able to take the 179D deduction, or at least pay for the qualifying upgrades to the lighting, HVAC, and or the building envelope. But unlike some of the other credits and tax incentives we're going to talk about today, the 179D deduction can be allocated in the case of if the building's owned by a government or a nonprofit entity. And what that means is that whoever designs the energy efficient systems in the building, so that could be an architect, in some cases even the mechanical engineer, can actually take advantage of this deduction. It is very complex, which is why we actually have an expert who strictly focuses on allocation projects on our team. It's not as straightforward as I designed this, I get the money. There's some loopholes and attestations that you have to do to prove that you're the one that actually deserves the deduction. Great, we're going to talk about 45L energy efficient home tax credit, which is my bread and butter. It is a tax credit that goes to the builders of energy efficient homes. Those standards have changed over the years because, like 179D, it was actually introduced in 2005, but in 2023 with the Inflation Reduction Act, they changed up some of the requirements to be able to be eligible for the tax credit. So buildings before the Inflation Reduction Act were eligible for a credit up to $2,000 per dwelling unit if it was a residential building less than 3 stories. So the classic garden style apartment building, townhomes, and single family homes could qualify for that. And the way that credit was quantified was that it had to be inspected by a HERS rater and have an energy model that shows that it is 50% more efficient heating and cooling compared to 2006 IECC. With the way that codes have changed over time, pretty much everybody's building beyond that. So starting in 2023, they mandated that to be eligible for the 45L tax credit, you need to either get Energy Star certified or DOZ Zero Energy Ready Home certified. With that, they increased the credit amounts. So it's up to $2,500 per unit for Energy Star and up to $5,000 per unit for Zero Energy Ready Homes. They also included eligibility for multifamily buildings bigger than 3 stories. So there's now no height limit for residential buildings to get the 45L tax credit. With that being said, single family homes have 0 prevailing wage requirements. They get the $2,500 per unit for Energy Star, $5,000 per unit for Zero Energy Ready Homes. For multifamily buildings, they need to be paying prevailing wage on the project to get the full credit amount. Without prevailing wage, it is $500 a unit for Energy Star and $1,000 per unit for Zero Energy Ready Homes certified units. So we'll go time to talk more about the building types on the next slide here. So as I mentioned, single, multifamily homes, apartment buildings, there is no height requirement or limitations starting 2023 going forward. Townhomes qualify, and with a new change to the Energy Star program that actually just got released January 15th, townhomes are now always considered single family homes. So if you're building townhomes, you do not have to pay prevailing wage to be eligible for the full credit amount. Student housing, like dorms, can also qualify for the 45L tax credit, as well as senior living facilities, as long as it's not an assisted living facility. There's a fine line where if you have a skilled nurse on staff, then it's no longer qualifies for the 45L tax credit, but it can qualify for the 179D deduction. So the clients are, in the wording of the tax code, it says the eligible contractor. What that really means is whoever has basis in the building during the construction process gets the tax credit. And if you have multiple owners of a building, then it gets broken out by proportion of equity in the project. So if there's 5 people, all claim it for one single family home, each 5 person would get $1,000 each on their K1s at the end of the day. So cost segregation. Cost segregation is a form of accelerated depreciation. By separating out asset classes from the entire building, which depreciates over a 30-year period, it can be different assets get shorter class lifespans that they get allocated into, allowing you to take more of the depreciation up front. So it can go for any new buildings, any renovations, and the more assets that are in there, the more that you can depreciate. So projects that can qualify for cost segregation are buildings that are located in the US. They are intended for long-term investments or holds, because if you take cost segregation and depreciate all of your basis and then sell the building, you do have to pay it back. So there's cost recaptures on cost segregation. If the building costs more than $750,000 to build, as I said, the more that the building costs, the more you can get back through accelerated depreciation. And you can do it for newly renovated or installed building systems. So it doesn't have to necessarily be the building itself. All right, finally, our fourth item here is the investment tax credit, 48E, which previously it was Section 48 tax credit, but they changed things just this year. It is for clean energy technology. So the technology has to have greenhouse gas emissions of equal to or less than 0. So that includes wind, solar, geothermal, hydropower, hydrokinetic, nuclear fission and fusion, if we ever get there. Certain waste energy recovery systems can also qualify, as well as energy storage systems can qualify. So solar, hydrogen, and electrical energy storage all can qualify for the 48E tax credit. The credit amount is usually 30% of the costs incurred for the installation of the property. You can get up to 70% with certain special bonuses like domestic content or low-income community bonuses. Don't mind going
Sean,
to the next slide.
We did just have a question come in the Q&A. I think we'll save that though for the end.
Oh, thanks. So new and existing facilities can claim the 48E tax credit. It is a general business credit. Unlike a lot of the other incentives we're talking about today, they have a direct pay option for nonprofit entities. So since nonprofits aren't paying taxes, they get it just as a cash check. There is also an option to sell the tax credits or transfer them to a third party. You just have to register yourself as wanting that when you go to claim the tax credits. Look-back studies are available through the open tax year, which is the same as 45L. So if you've built any qualifying properties in the last 3 years, you can still go back and claim them, as well as any potential bonuses. So, as I mentioned, the credit amount is based on the total cost of the qualified energy facility. If it is under 1 megawatt of capacity, you get 30%. The credit amount is 30% of the qualified costs, no matter what. If it's over a megawatt, it is 6% unless you pay prevailing wage. So there are prevailing wage requirements here, but only once you reach that 1 megawatt capacity, which is, most people know, that's a lot of energy. There is no stacking this, so you cannot claim the 48 or 48E along with the 45Y production tax credit or any other of the 45XQs and whatnot out there. So there's no double dipping except for with 45L. I was going to say, I think the only other thing that's important to note about the 48E is that there's apprenticeship requirements along with that prevailing wage requirement. So you need to have a certified apprentices on site that you're verifying before you're going to try to claim that full 30% if it's over a megawatt of energy. And I think with that, I'm handing it over to Grant.
Awesome. Thanks, Sean. That was really informative, and I have the envious role of not requiring a comprehensive understanding of the U.S. tax code, so that's a good start for me. You can skip ahead to the next slide here. So, as I mentioned at the onset of the call, Grant Keeney with Electrify, and so Electrify, we're focused more on the CPACE financing side of things. So starting off, what is CPACE, right? It's an acronym, Commercial Property Assessed Clean Energy. We use PACE and CPACE kind of interchangeably, but kind of why we're here and tying it all in with everything that Sean described. So, CPACE is a form of financing that kind of goes hand in hand with a lot of the measures that Sean laid out as being applicable for the 179D deduction, the 48E tax credit. So if you or any of your clients, have a building that's looking to take advantage of those tax benefits, you likely qualify for CPACE, either for upcoming improvements that you're planning to construct, or on a retroactive basis to finance past work and get liquidity or refinancing. Next slide. Okay, so what is CPACE financing? So the way I like to describe it, kind of putting my borrower hat on, is at the end of the day, it's another arrow in your quiver, to finance building improvement, whether it's new construction, renovation, minor or major renovation. So taking kind of a step back from a very high level. CPACE is a voluntary tax assessment, and so the framework that we use to kind of keep in mind when we're thinking through CPACE is there's kind of two key components that we have to remember. Is first and foremost is the building location in a state or jurisdiction that allows for CPACE, and then also does it make financial sense? So just like a conventional loan, there's similar underwriting on a DSCR and on a leverage standpoint. As I mentioned, the borrower is going to repay the financing through a special tax assessment levied on the asset. And so that's kind of the PA in CPACE, right? The property assessed portion of it. There's some key components and kind of nuances that I think are really important to highlight that make CPACE financing unique relative to other kind of conventional forms of financing. So on the right-hand side of this slide, I'll quickly kind of go through some of those. So first and foremost, the eligible improvements. This is going to be, program specific. When I say program specific, I'm usually talking about the unique program requirements within each state. But broadly speaking, we're talking about things like energy savings, resiliency. At the end of the day, it implies that work is being done on the project, whether it's upcoming, whether it's in process, or whether it's recently completed. The senior lien positions, this is an important one to understand. So this CPACE financing, because it's a voluntary real estate tax assessment, it takes the same senior position as taxes. So in some states it's pari passu, in others it's right behind property taxes, but at the end of the day it is senior to any other mortgage debt on the property. From a collateral standpoint, again, this is secured by an assessment contract, and there's a financing agreement that's put in place versus just like a promissory note in a conventional form of financing. And so that assessment contract is effectively what gives the right to the lender to collect the tax. The transferability of it, so this is fully transferable upon sale. So kind of dissimilar to a conventional form of financing that might have certain requirements or doesn't allow it at all, requires it to be paid off. This runs with the land, and so CPACE financing can be transferred upon sale. The repayment piece of it, so there's a key nuance here, because this is paid alongside the real estate taxes. This is going to be typically the same cadence from a repayment standpoint as your real estate taxes. So in a conventional form of financing where you might have monthly principal and interest payments, this is going to be something that is the collection cycle that mimics, whatever state you're in. So in California, for instance, it's twice a year. The term of the financing, again, big differentiator here. We're talking 20 to 30 years of term. It is tied to the weighted average useful life of the improvements that are being financed. So at the end of the day, this is a much longer term, but from amortization in the term of the loan than a typical form of financing. Last 2 points here. So it's non-accelerable, which means that at the end of the day, in a downside scenario, a CPACE lender can't foreclose like a senior lender would. The process is similar to the municipal tax foreclosure process, and where you go about and implement the workout. And then even then, that CPACE lender can only really default on the payments that are in arrears, not the entire balance of the CPACE. And then lastly, fixed rate or variable rate. So typically CPACE is going to be fixed rate. And in some states, they allow, variable rate where there's a reset, after a certain number of years, like a 5-year reset. Next. Yeah, so, CPACE isn't going to be a fit for every single project. It doesn't fit for every single scenario, but when it does fit, there are some tremendous benefits, and we really see a lot of borrowers, and we really appreciate some of the key aspects of the CPACE financing. So 100% LTC for qualifying improvements. So obviously, depending on the state, depending on the project budget, this can offer up to 100% financing of hard and soft costs for the eligible measures. We're in an environment right now where a lot of conventional lenders are pulling back on leverage. Rates are, probably higher than pro forma rates. And so CPACE is, a tool that can offer additional leverage at a cost of capital that probably can make the project pencil, and is going to be cheaper form of financing relative to other kind of substitute products. And then just, financing the improvements offer, significant utility savings, which increases cash flow. The refinance terms, again, we talked about on a retroactive basis, where you might be able to supplement a typical permanent loan with CPACE financing. It's non-recourse. I'll say it again. This is non-recourse financing in most all situations, right? So this is a huge benefit to borrowers in that sense. And then I mentioned, low cost, fixed rate, long term, up to 30%, up to 30 years of amortization. So what sort of situations can CPACE apply? I mentioned, work has to be being done on the project, right? So whether it's a new construction, renovation, or you're just, swapping out, some mechanical equipment, at the end of the day, there's work that's being done or that has been done. We typically say in the last 36 months. Some states allow longer, some states allow a shorter look back period. But at the end of the day, it is important to note that there is that look back period where you can still obtain CPACE financing even if the work is already complete. So when we think about, the situations, we think about three buckets. We have the energy and water efficiency. So some pretty kind of self-explanatory situations there where you're swapping out HVAC, electrical, plumbing. Some of the, I think, less appreciated aspects of, the energy efficiency piece of it is like the building envelope. When you think about, a modernization of a hotel or a multifamily building, kind of bringing it from a class C to a class B or B to A lot of that work that you're doing anyway to modernize the building is likely going to fall into this bucket of eligibility. The next one is going to be the renewable energy piece of it. I think this is the most obvious portion of kind of where CPACE can be applied. So the power creation, solar, wind, etc., energy storage, EV chargers, those sorts of things. And then lastly, I think this is probably the least known aspect of CPACE financing, and it doesn't apply to every state, but there's resiliency measures in many states that can be financed with CPACE. So we're talking, fire suppression, wildfire hardening, wind, hurricane resistance, seismic strengthening. California is one, for example, where seismic, wildfire, stormwater management can be financed with CPACE. Florida is another great example with the hurricane resistance measures. All right, so we said that's when CPACE can be financed. So where can CPACE be used? As you can see here on the map, this is a map from PACE Nation, which is the kind of one of the industry advocacy groups. All the states there that are highlighted in green are states that allow CPACE currently. There's a number of other states where the legislation has been passed and CPACE is enabled. And then the states that are in the gray are where it's not currently available. So I will say, if you have a property in a state that's currently grayed out there, don't be discouraged. Idaho, for example, was just created an active program in recent weeks. North Carolina is a new one as well that's authorized the use and expects to have an active program soon. So it's been really encouraging to see the number of states increase in terms of the active programs over the last few years. Go back to that slide real quick if you don't mind. So I just want to touch on quickly here, the legislative piece of it. So everything kind of first has to start at the state level with the legislative approval. From there, an individual county or a city has to stand up the program. So they use the power of that legislative bill, kind of interpret it into their own program that can be actively deployed. So if you are looking to, finance a project with CPACE, you will likely be dealing with a program. And so that's where this program piece of it kind of comes in. The program is there to make sure that all of the financings that are occurring within that jurisdiction are abiding by effectively the state legislation that was put in place. There's a lot of nuances when it comes to the location piece of it in terms of the different rules and regulations. At the end of the day, that's why companies like Electrify are here to help navigate that for folks, especially ones who are operating in multiple different states. So this is highlighting some data again from PACE Nation. Really interesting to see kind of the growth here, very steep and to the right in terms of the cumulative volume. So the cumulative volume is shown in terms of the amount of CPACE since 2009. I think the preliminary data for 2024 is saying, just right around 2.4 billion of CPACE was financed in 2024, and so the cumulative amount sits, right around $10 billion, total. There's a few reasons for this. I think there's been some secular tailwinds, like, more efficient building materials, more efficient building equipment, things that people are realizing are CPACE eligible. And we think that those kind of secular tailwinds are here to stay. We don't view a scenario where buildings will be less efficient going forward. It makes business sense. It makes environmental sense. But then there's also been some cyclical tailwinds that I think have really added kind of fuel to the fire over the last couple of years, basically from the Fed policy, right? So more and more lenders are consenting to CPACE as they're getting comfortable with the benefits, to the collateral, to the improvements of cash flow. But at the end of the day, a lot of lenders are pulling back in terms of leverage. Certain requirements are not what they were, a couple of years ago. And so borrowers, developers, they're looking for, other ways to tap into leverage, and CPACE has been able to fill that void. So yeah, this is a little bit of a self-serving slide here, right? So in that that chart that I just showed on the last slide, Electrify is kind of carving out a small piece of that volume, small but growing. Our platform that I mentioned is called FastPace. It was built from the ground up to offer a little bit of a different approach to some of the conventional or legacy CPACE providers in the market. And so we have a platform that's fully integrated, tech-enabled, that allows other lenders to fund CPACE on their own books, but through our platform. So we originate the deals, we underwrite the deals, we close on the transactions, and then post-close, we asset manage those transactions. Because we operate nationwide in every state, we have expertise on the different programs and the different requirements in each state. And then at the end of the day, we have pre-negotiated legal documents that apply to every program. We have pre-negotiated agreements with a lot of third parties that offer cost efficiencies. And what that does at the end of the day is it allows us to do these CPACE financings for deals of all sizes. And so as that deal volume has gone up and to the right, a lot of legacy CPACE providers are financing very large balance CPACE deals. There's a huge appetite for that in the market. As you all know, real estate is a very fragmented market. And at the end of the day, there's a lot of smaller financings that need to be done. And Electrify's platform has enabled that small balance CPACE to make economic sense, from a fee perspective, from a cost perspective, bringing in capital providers who want to fund those smaller deals. And so really trying to, round out, I guess, the capital that's out there for CPACE of all sizes. So last few minutes here, I think that this would be a good time to kind of highlight some of our case studies that we've done in terms of closings on the CPACE FastPace platform, excuse me. So I'll touch on a couple of these. Hopefully they resonate with some of the folks that are on the call and situations that they might have that are similar. But at the end of the day, I think the highlight here is that it's a really flexible form of financing that can be used in all kinds of different situations. I'll just highlight a few of these for now. The first one here is the Hampton Inn & Suites in Omaha. So as we're tying the CPACE in with the latent tax incentives, deductions, et cetera. This is a deal that we would say would qualify for 179D tax deduction. So this is a deal that is new construction. We finance, covers kind of multiple energy efficiency and electrification measures at this Hampton Inn in Omaha. This was just under $4 million. So again, small balance PACE, It was funded by a community bank based in Florida. But specifically on the measures, we're talking about new high efficiency, HVAC, windows, LED lighting, low flow plumbing fixtures. The next one this is a cool one. This is a 95-year-old mixed-use building in downtown Billings, Montana. So CPACE supported a range of energy efficiency measures here as well. And this was actually funded by a Montana-based lender, and it was one of the first few CPACE deals financed in the state. But again, just under $2 million, 25 years of term. And this was a great opportunity to take a building that was getting modernized, use CPACE financing in a really efficient way. The Candlewood Suites, Cape Girardeau. So again, this is a deal that would actually more qualify for like 48E, as highlighted by the Layton team here. This is a limited service hotel renovation. So a lot of those change of ownership PIPs, the property improvement plans that we see with hotels that are brand mandated. This was undergoing one of those processes. They also wanted to put on rooftop solar. So this financed just under $1 million of rooftop solar and some mechanical electric plumbing upgrades. Next slide. So Flatiron Heights is a really cool one as well. It's an adaptive reuse. This is a conversion project of a 1911 built building that was getting converted to kind of a mixed-use residential retail office. Another one that just under $1 million. This was funded with a Tennessee-based lender, and we actually closed this one roughly 60 days after that lender completed their lender training. In general, we kind of quote from signed term sheet to closing about 60 days is typical. This one was great to see, especially being one of the first deals, if not the first deal that closed in the city of Chattanooga for CPACE. And then the Aaliyah Lakewood, this is an underserved community in Atlanta. This was an adaptive reuse to a mixed use kind of office retail project, really infusing new life into this asset that is serves this underserved community. And this is also one that it was retroactive financing, so the work had already been done on this. How that worked is at closing there was a distribution for all the CPACE eligible work that qualified under this Atlanta program. And it was effectively a distribution at closing to reimburse the developer for all that work. And then last one here is the West Haven Professional Building, which is in Westminster, California. And this one is a bit more down the fairway in terms of the solar approach. So this was a deal that stabilized office building, and they were seeking to install rooftop solar PV system to finance to service 100% of the building's electricity needs. And so this was just under about $500,000, and it was funded with another kind of community bank on our platform that's based in Florida. And I think that's about it for the case studies.
Yeah, it looks like it. Thank you, Grant. And as you mentioned, right, like all of I think the biggest takeaway for the group here is if you're doing anything with tax incentives, you should be looking at CPACE financing. And if you're looking at CPACE financing, you should be looking to leverage some of the tax incentives as well, right? They kind of go hand in hand. They both work with the same types of systems that you're trying to increase your energy efficiency of your property to, as Grant mentioned, better serve the community and increase the longevity of the asset. So awesome. Yeah, well, with that said, we have a few questions here. We'll start with the first one. What documentation and compliance requirements should businesses be aware of when claiming these incentives? This was right at the end of Sean's portion. So Sean, I think this was really kind of aimed at you.
Yeah. So to be perfectly frank, each individual incentive has its own documentation requirements. For example, 45L requires the Energy Star DOE Zero Energy Ready Home certification. Cost segregation would just need to look at your depreciation schedules for 179D, the cost of property, as well as like mechanical and HVAC documentations. And for 4080, it's all cost of the installed qualifying facility. That can get a little, with the diversity of the equipment and depending on the setup, that can get a little more complex than just that. But high level, that's what would be needed to even start going on down the pathway of receiving any of these incentives.
Awesome. Grant, is there any specific documentation that is required for CPACE financing while we're on the topic of documentation?
Yeah, I think as you think about like the document collection for CPACE financing, it's going to look very similar in most ways to a conventional form of financing. Because work is being done, they're going to want, they being the lender, are going to want to mitigate any concerns with regards to environmental. So there's some environmental diligence. And then, qualifying the property in terms of all the credit metrics I mentioned with like DSCR, leverage, the borrower, right? The one thing I would say that's probably the most, unique piece of documentation for CPACE is going to be an energy audit. And so that there's a third party that effectively is going to have to come in, that's an engineer, and review the eligible scope, the work that's looking to be done, making sure that it qualifies within that program's kind of guidelines, and then also calculate, a savings to investment ratio in some instances, calculate that weighted average useful life in some instances or most instances. So that energy audit is kind of the one I would say that's more unique relative to other conventional forms of financing.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing that, Grant. And then we have another question here on New Jersey's new CPACE program and how it requires prevailing wages. This might be kind of a crossover question. How will this have a negative impact on smaller projects, or will it have a negative impact on smaller projects?
I can take that first. From a CPACE perspective, the short answer is yes. It's something that we're hopeful to see, some changes to, just to make it more aligned with the other, states in the region that have seen, tremendous growth of CPACE. At the end of the day, if there's a project that works because the prevailing wage and it also works because of the eligible improvements, then great. But to have that requirement on CPACE financings, especially the smaller ones, I'm certainly not an expert on the prevailing wage impact piece of it, but I have to suspect, putting my borrower hat on from my past world and past role in the development world, I would say that yes, it is going to probably have a limiting impact on the amount of CPACE that's being done in New Jersey, but we'll see. That's an evolving scenario. The program came out with some different amendments that allowed new construction to be financed. For example, that initially they said new construction projects were not going to be eligible for CPACE. That changed. So again, it's an evolving situation, so we'll have to see.
Yeah.
And I would just add to that a lot of the Inflation Reduction Act incentives, they all got increases for projects that pay prevailing wage. So it might make it more, if you're claiming those incentives, it might make it more financially viable for you to also then be able to claim CPACE and cover the costs of the prevailing wage with these incentives that are offered.
Yeah, definitely, Sean. So, Sean, this is a question for you. What do you think the chances are that bonus depreciation will be instituted at the 100% level again?
I think it's highly likely. But as of today, the current tax bills are both in the Senate and the House are in absolute chaos. So ultimately, we'll see what comes out of all of it. But I know that was part of Johnson's initial plan before the administration started, was to bring back bonus depreciation at the 100% level.
Wonderful. Awesome. And then Grant, we have a couple here for you. what property types are most active in utilizing CPACE financing?
Yeah, it's a good one. I would say, hotel is definitely a big one for a number of reasons. I think from an eligibility standpoint, if you think about, the lobby, right, you have a lot of eligible use kind of on the ground floor with, fitness and meeting rooms and, food and beverage. But then you go up, up the elevator, right, and you've got every individual room having kind of a stamped out lighting and fixtures, restrooms in every room, and so just end up seeing a lot of eligibility with a hotel property type. I think the other big component there is all of these brand mandated property improvement plans that are triggered upon sale or refinance or just because of the term of the franchise agreement might be ending, or the brand management agreement. And so at the end of the day, these modernizations that happen, on a certain cycle within, limited, select service, full service, etc. Just so much of that modernization, kind of bringing it up to the brand standard, it ends up being eligible. I think also at the end of the day, most lenders, from a property type perspective, will look at hospitality as a bit higher risk than multifamily or industrial per se. And because of that, the leverage or the rates that they're willing to extend to hospitality sector is likely going to be a little more, risk off. And that allows, an opportunity for CPACE to be implemented and kind of cover some of those gaps. So we see it quite a bit with hospitality. I think multifamily is another one. I mean, multifamily probably just because it's one of the more prolific property types in general. And so with new construction, with the major renovations, again, high use of the MEP, a lot of that equipment ends up kind of getting utilized more aggressively, and at the end of the day, we see a lot of CPACE going towards multifamily. There are, a couple of things to highlight just from kind of major benefits with like triple net leases, for example. So whether it's office or industrial, right? So probably more likely with industrial, kind of true triple net. There can be like a really tremendous benefit from a pass-through perspective because CPACE, again, it's treated, from a repayment standpoint as an operating expense, and they can typically pass through that cost to the tenants in a triple net lease structure. Not always, but that's just another kind of really great benefit. So I would say that most every property type is going to qualify in some form or fashion, but we really see it a lot in hospitality and multifamily.
Great. And then the last question that we have for you, Grant, is what sort of interest rate spread do you typically see on CPACE financing?
Yeah, good question. Not to dance around it, but it does depend, right? Like just like any lender, at the end of the day, they want to focus on the risk profile. So the location, the sponsor, the property type, what type of work is being done. Is it cash flowing or is it new ground up construction? Typically, because CPACE is it's longer term in nature, and the typical kind of tenure of these financings are around 10 years in terms of by the time they get either repaid or if there's a transaction that occurs and it's paid off. But the most lenders are benchmarking to the U.S. 10-year U.S. Treasury, and I would say rates are a spread above that between 300 to 400 basis points. So 10-year plus 300 to 400 basis points typically what we quote, and that's typically what we see in the market. But I think the trend though, as CPACE financiers are getting more comfortable with the product and the risk profile of it. It's a really attractive risk reward. We're hoping to see those spreads compress, as more lenders, appreciate kind of the risk reward profile of CPACE.
Awesome. I don't believe we have any other questions at this time. It looks like we answered all the questions in the chat and in the Q&A. Actually, we do have a couple more here in the Q&A. Let's see. Grant, do you see many transactions closed in which the CPACE payment is passed?
Is pass, like, what do you mean by that?
Is passed through like to the tenants?
Oh, yeah. So again, it kind of depends on the lease structure, right? If it's a triple net lease, then yes. I would say that the more institutional kind of tenants in like an industrial building, for example, they might have, a carve out in their lease that says, no, PACE pass through can be implemented in the OpEx or the recoveries. But again, triple net allows for that and is, I would say, the most prolific example of it. The other one with hotels is, if you've ever, stayed at a hotel and you're checking out and you get your invoice and you have all the, crazy resort fees and you have the taxes, the TOTs, all those things. Sometimes there might be a line item for like a green tax or a green, reimbursement. And it might be a small dollar amount, but that is probably a pass through to the hotel guest upon checkout. For some small portion of a recovery of the CPACE financing that's on that property.
Awesome. Very neat. Perfect. Well then, thank you everyone for coming to our webinar on enhancing energy efficiency through tax incentives and CPACE financing. A recording of the webinar will be available after this session, and we have all of our contact information here on the slides, ours here at Leighton, as well as Grant's and his team over at Electrify. Reach out if you have any other questions. And Grant, John, thank you so much for your time and joining us today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for the opportunity. Thanks for
Yeah, thanks, Pat.
Our pleasure.